My parents were never responsible. They weren't the kind of grandparents who baked cookies or took their grandson to the zoo just because. Their world revolved around themselves, their plans, their needs, their fun. But I was desperate. My ex-wife was off in Europe with her new husband, acting like our 6-year-old son didn't even exist. She never asked where he'd be staying while I was away, just shrugged and said, "You'll figure it out." So I did. Or at least, I thought I did. My parents acted excited. Of course, Lucas. He's our grandson. We'd love to have him. Looking back, I should have noticed how my mother hesitated before agreeing, how my dad mumbled something about having plans but never explained. I sat them down and made it clear. He's 6. He needs structure, meals on time, no junk food for dinner, no staying up past bedtime, and most importantly, never leave him alone. They smiled like I was overreacting. "We raised you, didn't we?" My mother said with a laugh. That should have been my second red flag, but I had no choice. The phone call that changed everything I called every day. Every day they told me the same thing. "Oh, he's having a blast. We took him to the park today. We baked cookies together." Every night when I called, "Oh, he's already asleep. He had such a big day, he passed out early." They even sent me videos, him playing in the backyard, laughing, smiling. Everything looked normal. So, I didn't question it. Then, on the morning of the 8th day, my phone rang. It was Bill, my parents' neighbor, a retired mechanic in his 70s. He never called me. "Lucas," he said, his voice uneasy. "I don't want to alarm you, but something's wrong." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I've been hearing crying from your parents' house since last night. It stops for a while, then starts again. I knocked, but no one answered. Their car is in the driveway, but I don't think they're home." My whole body went cold. They have to be. I was already dialing my parents' number on my other phone. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I texted my mother, "Mom? Call me now." Nothing. I called Bill back. "I don't care how you do it. Get in the house." A long pause. "Are you sure? Break a window if you have to." I heard glass shattering through the phone. Silence. Then Bill cursing under his breath. Then, his voice tight with anger. "They're not here, Lucas." A pause. "But your son is." A 9-hour drive of rage. "He's in his room shaking," Bill continued. "Looks like he's been alone for a while." I was already throwing clothes into my suitcase. "Put him on the phone." There was a rustling sound, then a small, broken voice. "Daddy?" I stopped breathing. "Hey, buddy, I'm coming, okay? You're safe now. Bill's with you." My son sniffled. I was scared. The thunder was really loud. My hands clenched into fists. He was scared, and I wasn't there. They weren't there. "Bill, he says they left 3 days ago." 3. They packed bags, told him they'd be back soon, and locked the door behind them. 3 days. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. "It's a 9-hour drive, Lucas." But I had already hung up. I broke every speed limit on the way, got pulled over 3 times. 2 cops let me go after hearing the story. The third one looked horrified and told me, "Drive safe, but get there fast." By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, it was almost midnight. Bill was sitting outside with my son, who was curled up in a blanket on the porch swing, half asleep. The second I stepped out of the car, my son ran to me and clung to my legs like I might disappear. I knelt down and held him. "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here." Bill stood nearby, arms crossed. The kid barely ate. I gave him what I had, but he wouldn't touch much. Just kept saying, "They'll be back soon." I swallowed down my fury. Did they call? Text? Bill shook his head. Nothing. When they finally showed up. At 7:12 a.m., the front door opened. I expected guilt, maybe even worry. Instead, my mother walked in like she'd just gotten back from running errands. My father followed, stretching like he'd had the best sleep of his life. They were tanned, relaxed, dressed in vacation clothes. "Oh, Lucas! You're here." My mother beamed. We were going to call you later. I stared at her. Where the hell have you been? She waved a hand. Oh, just a little last-minute trip. Your dad and I found a great deal on a cruise and we figured why not? She actually laughed. You wouldn't believe the buffet on the ship. My hands curled into fists. You left a 6-year-old alone for 3 days. She rolled her eyes. Lucas, don't be so dramatic. We left him plenty of food. I looked at my father, who was making coffee like it was a normal morning. Are you serious? He's 6. My father shrugged. Not a baby. Kids need to learn independence. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Independence? He's in 1st grade, not college. My mother sighed like I was boring her. Lucas, we were gone for a few days. He's fine. I pointed at the couch where my son was still sleeping. He cried alone in the dark during a thunderstorm. He barely ate. He thought you were coming back any minute. My mother pursed her lips. Oh, don't be ridiculous. We needed this trip. We deserved it. That was it. Something inside me snapped. I walked to the front door, grabbed their car keys, the car I had bought them, and shoved them into my pocket. My father frowned. Hey, what are you doing? You're not going anywhere? He laughed. You can't just take our car. It's my car, I said flatly. And if you want to go somewhere, call an Uber. My mother gasped. Lucas, that's completely unfair. I turned around, my voice deadly calm. You know what's unfair? Locking a 6-year-old in a house so you can go drink margaritas on a cruise? I picked up my son and walked out. My mother stormed onto the porch, barefoot, still dressed like she just stepped off a cruise ship. Lucas, you're not taking our car. Give me the keys. I kept walking. My son's tiny hands gripped my jacket, like he thought if he let go, I'd disappear. My father sighed. We get it. You're upset. But this little tantrum... I stopped and turned. My tantrum? My voice was ice. You left a 6-year-old alone for 3 days. My mother groaned. Oh my God, not this again. I just looked at them. If this were anyone else, the cops would already be here. Then I got in my car and drove away. I never looked back. I should have known they'd try something like this. But I didn't think they'd be this desperate. A week after I took my son and left them standing on their porch, red-faced and powerless, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally realized they had no excuse for what they'd done, that they were too ashamed to reach out. I was wrong. The showdown, I was making dinner when I heard tires screeching outside. A second later, bang, 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 someone pounded on my door. I knew who it was before I even looked. I opened the door, and there they were, my parents, standing on my porch like 2 overgrown children about to throw a tantrum. But they weren't alone. Leaning against a rusty pickup truck was my Uncle Roy. I hadn't seen him in years, but I recognized that permanent scowl of his. He was the family's self-proclaimed fixer, the one they called when they needed someone to talk sense into people. A big guy, built like a retired linebacker. I sighed. Of course, they brought Roy. He pushed off the truck and walked toward me like he owned the place. Lucas, we need to talk. I crossed my arms. No, we really don't. My mother scoffed. You've made things very difficult for us, young man. I almost laughed. Oh, you mean by taking away the car I bought you? By canceling the credit cards you stole from me? My father grumbled. You didn't have to go that far. I clenched my jaw. You left my child alone for 3 days. That wasn't going too far. Roy stepped in, holding up a hand like he was some kind of mediator. All right. Let's calm down. Then he turned to me. You know, Lucas, family takes care of family. That's how it works. I narrowed my eyes. Oh, really? That's funny, because last I checked, family doesn't abandon a 6-year-old to go drink margaritas on a cruise. Roy sighed and shook his head like I was a lost cause. You can't just cut them off. It's not right. They're struggling now because of you. I blinked. Because of me? Roy nodded, dead serious. They don't have a car, Lucas. How are they supposed to get around? I gestured at him. You literally drove them here. Seems like they're doing just fine. My mother huffed. That's not the point. We're your parents. You owe us. I stared at her. I owe you? My dad nodded like it was common sense. We raised you, didn't we? Fed you, clothed you. I cut him off. You didn't babysit me, Dad. That's what parents are supposed to do. Roy lifted his hands again, trying to play peacemaker. All right, let's settle this like adults. There's just one thing you have to do to make this right. I already knew I wasn't going to like this. And what's that? My mother smiled, thinking she had me. Give us back the car and reinstate the credit card. I actually laughed. A real deep, you've got to be kidding me laugh. Wow, you really think that's going to happen? Roy took a step closer, his voice lower. Look, be reasonable. I tilted my head. See, Roy, that's where we have a problem. You think reasonable means do whatever they want, no matter how badly they screw up. That's not how it works anymore. Roy's face darkened. You don't want to start a war over this, I smiled. You think this is a war? No, Roy. A war is what happens if you ever show up at my house again and try to intimidate me. I took a slow step forward, locking eyes with him. Because I'll call the cops so fast you won't even have time to finish that little speech you've got planned. Silence. Then my mother scoffed and waved a hand. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Lucas. We're your family. I looked her dead in the eye. Number you're not. She recoiled like I had slapped her. I turned, walked inside, and slammed the door in her face. The aftermath, I should have expected what happened next. My parents weren't the type to accept consequences. They weren't the type to sit quietly and reflect on their mistakes. No, they were the type to make themselves the victims. And that's exactly what they did. Within a day, they launched a full-scale pity campaign. They called every relative we had, on both sides. Even distant cousins we hadn't seen in years. They told everyone I had stolen their car, left them stranded, cut them off for no reason. According to them, they were two loving, elderly parents who had given me everything, only to be cruelly abandoned by their selfish, ungrateful son. And people believed them. The calls started pouring in. First, Aunt Linda. Luke, I just heard what happened. How could you do that to your own parents? Then my dad's cousin, Mike. I always knew you had a temper, but this is low. Then more. People who never cared about my life suddenly had a lot to say about my choices. At first, I ignored them, but they wouldn't stop. Finally, when Aunt Carol, the one relative I actually respected, called, I answered. She launched into the same speech. Family loyalty, respect, how we only get one set of parents. I let her talk. Then, when she was done, I told her everything. How my parents agreed to watch their 6-year-old grandson. How I had trusted them. How they had lied to me while they packed their bags. How they had locked my son in a house alone for 3 days while they went on a cruise. How the only reason my son was alive was because a neighbor heard him crying and broke in. When I finished, Aunt Carol was silent. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." And that was all it took. By the next day, the whole family had turned against them. The sympathy calls stopped. The judgment disappeared. And the best part? It turned out my parents hadn't just lied about me. They had also downplayed their vacation. They had told everyone they were stranded without a car, but what they didn't mention was that they had actually planned another trip to Vegas. With what money? The emergency credit card, the one I had canceled. That was the real reason they had shown up at my house, demanding the car and the card back. Not because they were struggling, not because they needed help, because they wanted another vacation. When people found out, they were done. And my parents? They were furious. They tried to do damage control. But it was too late. And for the first time in my life, I knew they would never have power over me again. Because the only thing that mattered was the little boy sleeping safely in his bed, knowing that from now on, he would never be abandoned again. Thanks for watching this video. Please like and subscribe.